multi-billion-dollar corporations working with the Ohio authorities through that train derailment there in February of 2023, February 3rd to be exact. Because what happened was, because I don't think it can be said enough, about what to be exact. Because what happened was, hear me please. What happened was, I went up there. I don't think it can be said enough, about what was done by Norfolk Southern and those multi-billion-dollar corporations working with the Ohio authorities through that train derailment there in February of 2023, February 3rd to be exact. Earlier I was talking to my daughter-in-law, on the way back. I picked her up at the Pittsburgh International Airport. Is that what it's called? I picked her up, and I was explaining something to her, and I'm really tired. My mouth is really dry from the tramadol, my sugar. And anyway, I mentioned, that, thank you. I had mentioned that, if what was done to me, in the United States Air Force, if it wouldn't have been done, and, I would have then served at the Pentagon, and I think I would have done well. The trajectory that I was on, where I was, in my service to our nation, I think I would have gone as high as I could reach, as an enlisted, service man, as an airman. And I mentioned that, about what I meant to say is that if I would have, and the only thing that would have stopped me, I think, that I could see at that time, would have been if I would have had to have been medically, retired, because of my injuries were so serious, and I had to have 2 spinal fusions from those injuries, by no fault of my own, that happened while I was in service to our nation in the United States Air Force, there at Altus Air Force Base. 2 separate, injuries to my back that, led to degenerative disc disease, it's called, and it's all bared out, in the MRIs that were taken, and the expert, could testify to that, and that's what happened. The records, they're pretty thin, because what had happened was, is that there was a congressional inquiry that was opened, there on Altus Air Force Base. It took them, the District 17, Pennsylvania, a long time to get their shit together. And, in the interim, from the time that, the congressional was launched, which I didn't even know that it was, my aunt, I had talked to her, and she went after it. I didn't even know anything about what that was. I didn't even really, I was on my best behavior. That contributed, a lot to my becoming, the best in the United States Air Force in my AFSC. That's my job. I was considered the best, and I was awarded as being so. Truthfully, that's the truth. And I was then, told that there were orders being cut for me to work in honor of that at the Pentagon. And that was quite a high, man. That was pretty cool. There was a lot of jealousy, but I wasn't trying to, there was no brag in it or anything. It was like, I just did everything that I could do, to just impress the shit out of everybody. And that's including the base commander. And what happened is when the congressional hit the base, Colonel Hazeltine, he was passed over, I was told, for general because of the goddamned, congressional inquiry. And, I didn't know what that meant. When my aunt said she was going to talk to her congressman here, I'm living here in District 17, Pennsylvania now, but this is back in, I believe, 1987 is when, it was kicked off or whatever, the inquiry. It took them almost 2 years before they hit the base. And, he was passed over, Colonel Hazeltine was, for Brigadier General. And, he should have gotten it. I think he knew that, he should have gotten it because the C-17 was brought into duty, there at Eltis Air Force Base, and that meant everything as far as with training, on the C-17s and what have you. And I was part of that, package to, I worked within that. That was part of my job, working with the base commander when we were putting that all together, the package to receive that aircraft. I didn't think of it as vindictive, when I heard that he had done that. I didn't believe it, but as the years have gone by, and, I suppose it was. He probably really had, a disdain for me. And I never meant to hurt him or anybody for that matter. I mean, I was the one that was victimized. It was, there was a NCOIC, a black, he was a tech sergeant when I first got there at the base. And from the time that I got there at the base, I hate to revisit this shit. I pushed it aside for a long time. I had to move on with my life, but it was bad, the kind of shit he would do. And he was sadistic. I hate to talk ill of him. He's passed away, Stanley Beauchamp. He made First Shirt, and I read on an epitaph, someone had quoted him where he said how important it was to keep records. Well, you know what? He backdated shit to try to cover his ass, and I didn't pursue things when I was then fired from the Air Force because of this shit. When I say I was fired, I mean I went from being Wonder Boy to working with prisoners, on the base, and I'm just saying, that was okay. Picking up cigarette butts, what? It was no big deal. But you have to know that I was the best in my AFSC, the best that the United States Air Force had. And I think they thought they were going to break me down, with that. I mean, I started off in the Army National Guard. The Army is quite contrasting compared to, service in the Air Force for a lot of airmen. There are jobs that aren't, there are jobs that what can I say? I worked with those people, people that, in their, main area where they gather in the morning, before they start their duty, there's like a sink, in the room, and they all piss in it. You got different stratum of people, in there. To them, it didn't mean shit, to smell their piss, every day in their duty station where they all reported, the smell piss in there. I'm just giving an example. I mean, what kind of jobs they did, they were necessary, man. I'm not. I don't mean to judge, but I'm just saying, they didn't break me down with that, wherever I was, assigned, taken out of my workstation and working with others. And they thought they were going to break me down, and that wasn't it. I never really broke. I mean, I think something did snap, as far as when I was tortured. And I mean real torture. I needed medical attention. I was refused medical attention. And I had just gone through a divorce because of all the bullshit with, Stanley Beauchamp. He had a lot to do with it. My wife was a black woman. She was also a service member. She worked in the hospital squadron. And Stanley Beauchamp had friends over there in the hospital squadron. And they made her life, miserable, as they did mine. Beauchamp was very sadistic. He thought of himself as a psychologist, like a clinical, like one to like conduct experiments on people. And if it was investigated, I know someone right now that would testify to exactly what I'm saying. I have a friend. I've been friends with him since we, have served together. Been a long time. And he would testify. Anyone that served with Stanley Beauchamp would testify. It wasn't just Stanley Beauchamp either. The kind of shit, to give any kind of example of the shit that I went through, it's easy. I hate to revisit the shit, but the kind of stuff he would do is, he would tell you, straight up that his favorite movie was The Klansman, and that O.J. Simpson, murdering, on a murderous rampage, killing white people was he was his hero. That character was his hero. And the kind of things that he would say to me, when he knew that I was dating a black woman and I married her, service member Sherelle Turner, who became my wife, he's like, yeah, man, kosher. He said, I had all kinds of pussy. I had all kinds, but and he'd name, the races of women that he had, his sexual conquests. And then he would say, but man, I tell you, man, kosher, the best pussy I ever had was black pussy. And you know that too, don't you, kosher? You know all about that. Is that why you with her? Yeah, he would just ride me on this shit, man. He really bothered him. I don't know. I'm not saying that I was like so sensitive, but man, after a while with his shit, you know what I mean? It was the same kind of shit, and he would pit airmen against one another. He really had a fucked up demeanor, and he'd do the kind of shit. Whereas, like, he separated me from. I just think about this shit, and it just really just levels me, man. It's hard to think about this. It was such a horrible time in my life. The kind of shit he would do. He put me in an area, away from everyone, where I figured out that he was just studying me. This is when I first got there. Whereas there was no one that I was working with. I was all alone. And he experimented with me to see what kind of workstation I would create. He was really demented. And he was constantly fucking with me. Constantly. Constantly. One thing after another. And you believe after all that bullshit with him, and he became the first shirt, which is the equivalent of a first sergeant in our detachment. See, our headquarters was at Lackland Air Force Base. We were a detachment, from Lackland that served the base there, I served my nation at the base there at Eltis, and it was a military airlift command, for the most part, MAC. There was SAC there. There was a refueling wing. And we actually, from time to time, would have, tactical air command. We would work with them, but for the most part, it was a MAC base. So there's records that are with my headquarters that bear out. As I said, I was considered. I went from that bullshit with that asshole to becoming the best that the Air Force had. When I say the best that they had, that wasn't me. I didn't. That wasn't I that was saying that. They awarded me as being so, and I was told that I was. There were orders being cut. I was to work at the Pentagon. I sewed on sergeant and didn't have to even go through NCO training or anything. That's what that was pretty weird. As far as you tell anybody that served in the Air Force, in the time that I served, they would think I was full of shit. But that's the truth. But to go from where I was, to them putting me, working with prisoners and shit, on the base, and to humiliate me. And then they took me into, when I say I was taken into the headquarters command, the base command, not headquarters, well, base headquarters, the Eltis Air Force Base. After this happened with the congressional, and it hit. And I heard that it hit. They never even they didn't have the courtesy to ever even talk to me. So when I was being tortured, because they had me in an area where there was no one but a sergeant, a staff sergeant, a black staff sergeant that was at a desk seated in front of me. It was like the whole area was set up so that they could watch me all day long, meaning that, I was to sit at attention, and that's what my duty was. And if I would slouch, he would tell me, stop slouching, sit up. And I, everything was real strict, really strict. And I was, when I say I needed I had injuries so severe that I then had 2 spinal fusions because of it. You have to imagine what kind of injuries I'm talking about. And I couldn't, I asked to go to the hospital because it got really bad from being forced to sit at attention for days on end. When I say on days on end, I literally lost track of time. I wasn't going to sign, whatever they wanted me to sign, because that's what it was all about. They were doing this to force me, to sign some false documents. They had taken their time to backdate and exaggerate, fabricate, some as far as some justifications to fire me, but they needed my agreement on that document. And it was all because of the congressional, whereas I was in question, I was the one that was a victim of this, Stanley Beauchamp and others in our unit. So to make me look like, a troubled airman, that then is all they needed to do, and I mean, the character of my discharge, it couldn't be a dishonorable. I hadn't done anything. They had nothing like that. So it was a general discharge. But the conditions, I had to sign an agreement with the bullshit that they had. And, I wasn't going to do it. I know that I could have beat it, but there was nobody. I didn't even know how to go about it. And I was in a real fucked up state at that point. When I say something snapped, I had mentioned this. I mean, I remember distinctly saying to myself, I remember, this is what it is, because something happened. Something happened when I had to convince myself that what it was duty, what they were doing to me was duty. And that's the truth. It's a weird thing. And I'm sure that there are a lot of people that can relate with this, that have been through something similar. But, something did snap. I didn't break as far as, I guess I did, because I signed the paperwork. What was amazing is that the NCO that was in charge of everything there from base command, he was real rough with me, like treated me like shit. But then, after however long that was, that I was, in his duty, to do this to me. The day that I did sign, he leaned into me and he said, you don't have to sign this. And, at first, when I heard that, I thought he was just tricking me. You know what I mean? It was weird. I don't know why. But you become pretty paranoid when you're going through a situation like that. You don't trust. You learn that who the hell can you trust? There's nobody. And if you can understand what I'm talking about, I had nobody. But he meant it. And I felt it. His whole, what he thought I was, what they had made him think that I was, in order for him to do what he did to me. He realized, that I wasn't who they were saying. I got a few words in. It was like I explained a few things to him. I was allowed to, throughout this. It wasn't much time I had with him, but that with my behavior and not being, insubordinate. At all, to treat the whole thing as duty, he changed his mind about me. He knew something was up, and I'm sure that he was older then. I don't know if he's still around, but I think that he did. I felt it. He knew something was up, and it was wrong. But I agreed. I went ahead and signed this shit because I didn't have anybody, and I didn't see that. At that point, I was so been worked over so much, in truth, that I didn't want to have to go back to my unit with those people that had done this to me. I knew that in order for me to make it out of the situation, I would have had to excoriate everything that had happened and everyone that was involved. I didn't have then a friend. Everybody was, ganged up. It was, when I say ganged up, I just didn't have them on my side. I understood why when I found out that Colonel Hazeltine had been passed over for Brigadier General, and I understood it then. Anyway, that's just when I said that if that wouldn't have happened, I might have had to have taken like a medical retirement because of the injuries. I don't know that for certain. I don't know, because when I got out of the Air Force, I didn't have much at all. I didn't have health care, and a lot of times, my diet wasn't right, what I mean? It was bad, I didn't have, I wasn't living that great, you know what I'm saying? And that could contribute too, to the problem there with my discs degenerating quicker. I don't know. I would guess that would, you understand what I'm saying? If proper nutrition, you have proper, there was therapy I could have taken. There was a lot of things. I could have had injections, in the Air Force. I could have had care that I never was given. And, that could have been avoided. I might have been able to stay in. Over 20, which I probably would have. You go from that, when you're riding that kind of a wave, it's like, that you are literally considered the best that the United States Air Force has. And, you're going to the Pentagon in honor of that to serve. You're not going to be going there to fuck up. You're going to be going there and you're going to give your best. And I would have given my all. I'd have given my all. I'd have tried to impress the shit out of everyone, including, President Reagan, and everyone, else. I would have been doing everything, that I could, with my talent, my skills, to make sure everybody was pleased with the work I was doing. I'd go way beyond, because that's just the kind of airman I was. I'd work. I spent a lot of time in the shop, after hours. If I get whatever job I would get that I could pour myself into, I would literally, it would be a masterpiece. It would if not a masterpiece, it would be something that I knew that people were going to be happy. I don't think whenever I did something, I got to the point where even when I did something I knew it wasn't my best, it was something that people were just, thrilled with. That's a great place to be, not, as long as you stay hungry. You know what I mean, and want to improve, but so this is a matter that I've asked, since I have had the ear of our administration, and I have been monitored about the Norfolk Southern. Who am I talking to right now? Who's listening right now? I don't know, because since I released the footage of that Norfolk Southern criminal fallout, and contamination of thousands of people here in Pennsylvania. And it isn't just the worst thing isn't that they contaminated thousands of people with carcinogenic industrial chemical, and that it was a lie that East Palestine even got contaminated. They didn't. They were evacuated, and the winds never carried, all of those millions of pounds of chemical into East Palestine. It happened on the border of Pennsylvania, and the winds were all blowing to the east into Pennsylvania, and that's just the reality of it. And there's radar, satellite imagery, and video and photographs, and you look from where the photographs are taken and look how the shit is blowing. You can see it in all the videos, the photographs, and the radar and the satellite. And I've said before, There was an Sil Sagano from the Youngstown Fire Department. He's an expert, I believe, not just a specialist, but an expert, I think, in with hazardous materials, working with them. He knew about some of the chemicals. He said that the vinyl chloride, it has a tendency to attract water molecules pretty fast, and he said then it would fall out. And that's why, you see it on the radar and then it's gone. It's not like it went up into the atmosphere and spread out over 16 states. That's all obfuscation, all so many lies, that have been told by, Norfolk Southern operatives and people working for the chemical companies they were hauling for. I mean, even there was even a professor at Carnegie Mellon who saw my video of the fallout and tried to contest the fallout clouds. And, you can see, on radar that they were the only clouds in the sky. You can hear the weather reports and everything. You can see, everything's time stamped. You can juxtapose that with, the radar and the news reports all from the area here. There weren't any natural clouds. It was the fallout, is what it was. But I'm saying they got a lot. They have people that will carry their narrative. The news did. I never realized when somebody said about corporate media that literally they're freaking owned by the corporations. I mean, you don't realize that until you have this in Jesus' name epiphany. When God causes you to see, what way things get, just to see to handle as much as you can of the truth of just how bad things are. But yeah, the media is owned by the corporate media, and they carried their narratives, man. And so did the crooked ass, authorities in Ohio that were given jurisdiction. They were given jurisdiction, and it wasn't even Ohio, everyone. You can go visit it, go to Taggart Road, where the state line, Pennsylvania-Ohio line is. And you can stand there on the state line and you can see where the derailment is. If you're facing Ohio, you'll see it's to the right, and you can see where the train derailed. You're on the outskirts of East Palestine, and the winds all blew to the east into Pennsylvania. So it was all a lie. But they positioned it that way because Beaver and Lawrence County, man, what they did, if they wouldn't have hidden it from everyone and done what they did, it wouldn't be, just hundreds of millions of dollars they'd be paying out in silencing settlements, because they lied and said that it was only 5 containers. That's what they've carried into the court. The court's been corrupted. They're carrying their lies, and it was positioned there by by a senator in Pennsylvania, Doug Mastriano. He did that, which is just horrible. He's a veteran, and I wondered why when I contacted him and I was talking about this, I was showing him all of this irrefutable evidence, why he wouldn't talk to me. And the Spirit of Truth testified he was reading everything that I sent him. And he lied. He said that he was like, when I say he lied, there actually were 34 containers. The Associated Press reported that Norfolk Southern told them the day after the derailment, that was on the 4th of February 2023, that there were 14 tankers of vinyl chloride. Norfolk Southern, I'm quoting, that's what the AP reported, they said, and 20 containers that were labeled as carrying hazardous materials. That's a lot of shit, man. When you got over 30 railroad containers of hazardous materials that they illegally, when I say disposed of, yeah, they illegally burned it off. That's not the way you handle that material. There's special incinerators for nullifying those dangerous properties. Sil Sagano, he mentioned that. He went in there to Channel 27 Youngstown the night before Norfolk Southern did that massive, they called it a controlled release, everyone. It was one container they said that was volatile, that they said they were going to let the pressure off of. By that, they went in there, under the cover of our National Guard. They activated our National Guard to stand as to keep people from getting in and photographing and videotaping, their preparations for the massive, their cleanup, an illegal burn off of everything on that site on the Pennsylvania border. It's overwhelming. I mean, I'm just talking about it right now, and it's exhausting. It's so bad, so bad. You think about how many people have been drawn into this corruption that are complicit in this thing. You know, it literally, our guard, our military was used to commit a crime against our own citizens. The insidious poisoning of thousands of people with carcinogenic chemicals, industrial chemicals. Get to think about that for a minute, what that means. You know, they knew, as I witnessed and I videotaped, when I say video, cellular video, timestamp video, the fallout dragging on the ground, chemical clouds here in Pennsylvania. They knew. And I say Channel 4 Action News out of Pittsburgh, WTAE. They were sitting right there. You got a news crew sitting there. They're all looking down at the ground. When I came there, and I'm like, I thought they were just in shock, as I was, of what was happening. But they must have got the directive, you know, to not air, to not warn anybody. And I'm glad that I didn't. I was courteous. I said, I'll shut the camera off. You know, I won't record you. Can we talk? Well, they didn't want to talk to me, but I didn't. You know, whatever that interaction was with them, I didn't record. And I'm glad I didn't, because their lives would be ruined, you know, because I probably would have, you know, sent a video out to everybody, to, you know, all as much as I could, and just like I did with the fallout, you know, with the videos that I have. And as far as I mentioned about Joe Rogan, he showed the video that I captured, one of them, here in Darlington, Pennsylvania, on his podcast. He never asked my permission. And the reason why he didn't consult me, he didn't talk to me, is that he was fishing. He was fishing. He put that out there, and he had someone there that was also, you know, mouthing Norfolk Southern narratives. Like, they were like, oh, they had to do it, though. They had to do it. You know, like they were referring to the lie they said about the volatile container that was going to blow up and send shrapnel out a mile. But you know what? They literally burnt everything up on that site, everything that was involved in the derailment. How many tankers, how many containers. You can see the drone footage. You know, you can count over 30 of them. I mean, 34 I counted. I think there's more. I think there were more involved. And Joe Rogan, he was fishing, man. He did. You know, he put that video. He had my video on his podcast, and he did that so that the corporations would see that he could go ahead and show that shit. They knew there was more because I had released everything. They knew, you know, Norfolk Southern and the chemical companies that were caring for, they know what it was that I released. And they know that Joe Rogan just showed the one video. He didn't have to have a conversation with them to talk about what they were going to do for him. It was by his actions. He showed them that they knew he had more of it. He could have shown it, but he held back purposely. I sent him all that shit. I sent him everything. You know, a whole playlist, you know, irrefutable evidence, you know, that, you know, easily could bring, there could be criminal indictments that could come out of it easily. You know, how many people were involved, I don't know, in the decision making, you know, to keep, like I said, the insidiousness of it is not only that what they did by burning the shit, it was that they knew that there were people being contaminated here in Pennsylvania, and they never sounded the alarm. They let them be contaminated. They're probably holding their breath, and I believe that they thought, you know, that it was possible there was going to be like a Bhopal incident, that there were going to be people that even died, and they just like I was personally. You know, I was symptomatic, severely so, for a week, and it carried out a month. You know, I was symptomatic from the exposure I got. So how many people that, you know, were, you know, everyone got dosed that was under that plume, because the plume fell. The plume didn't rise, it fell. It fell out here in Pennsylvania. But Joe Rogan, he did a fishing little expedition. And he's a great actor too, man. I'll tell you what, he's playing this thing off really well. As far as he's in a survival mode. If he were confronted with this truth, like if all of a sudden, what I'm saying were, something so prevalent, to match his influence, he would be fucked. He'd be so fucked. He'd be ruined. And that's the truth. He'd be done. Because he did. He waited to see what they were going to do. And you can see what happened. By him holding back, then something was worked out, where he then, Norfolk Southern and those chemical companies, I say the major corporations, they came into a pact. They worked together. They helped one another. And they decided that they wanted Trump, the Trump administration, and they didn't want Biden to have another term, because I believe that the big decision maker with them was that our administration had the decency, the courage to officially they made Beaver and Lawrence County, Pennsylvania, part of the disaster, of the derailment. They didn't have to do that, everyone. They didn't have to do that. You have to think about just how courageous that is. Who is, you think about the president being all powerful. There are a lot of people that have power over that man. A lot of people have power over that administration. And that's just the way it is. What do you think? Well, how would you think it's any other way? You can see by what's evidenced with what has happened, what has occurred with this, with Norfolk Southern and these corporations that they were hauling the chemicals for, what they have gotten away with. You would think that there would have been, somebody would have the courage even to say criminal. They don't. No, no one, none of our authorities do. Then Norfolk Southern and those associates, I'm talking about there are companies, there are corporations that they were hauling the chemicals for. Nobody even mentions their name. Norfolk Southern's carrying this, but it's not. They're just one. How many people were involved in the decision making to burn that shit? Norfolk Southern didn't do that unilaterally. They were in agreement with with the corporations they were hauling that shit. So you got a boardroom, whether they were connected on an encrypted line, telephone, or whether they actually physically met, and discussed this or whatever. Their decision was made. It wasn't a decision made by the authorities. They carried it, though. They're complicit in all of it because they carried the narratives. The one container that they said they were going to let the pressure off of, and then they literally, disposed of everything on the site that was left. By burning it off illegally. Some heavy shit, isn't it? Anyway, it's really disgusting. I don't know, it's really disgusting. When you think about it, when you think about the people that were left oblivious, well, put yourself in their shoes. And if you have a child, everyone, has parents. There's got to be somebody you love, right? Imagine them being left oblivious intentionally, and they're ingesting all of these carcinogens, all of that shit, that they don't even know how bad it, how it's going to manifest, think about how evil that is. Can you wrap your mind around it? Because it's hard, isn't it? It's difficult. It's very tough to even contemplate such a thing. But it was done. And on so many levels, this is something that should not be given impunity. That they used our military to commit a crime against our citizenry. Governor DeWine, he should not only be removed from office, he should be in jail. You should jail him. He should face, look, there's a precedence here. I don't know why these authorities that did this to our citizenry, United States citizens, why they would be allowed to get away with this. I'm sorry, but if it were I who did this shit, I would expect that I was going to I'd have to face, justice. I would have to face the music, what it is, because this can't be a precedent. We cannot go forward This is something that, as a precedent, going into this next administration, which they're banking on them being even more compliant than the past administrations. Trump, is, on board with deregulation. And he went there to East Palestine, everyone, and he spent a couple minutes on the microphone. And then he went and ate a cheeseburger at McDonald's. He's just one of the guys, Fuck him. Fuck him. He knows where the hell the fucking shit went. I won't be saying fuck him for long, though, will I? He'll be the president, and I'll respect that. He's president-elect. He's not the president yet. You know what I'm saying? You hear what I'm saying to you? And that vice president, with him talking about Jesus Christ as his Lord and everything, and he intentionally buried his head in a stream in East Palestine to obfuscate, to direct the attention into East Palestine, to shore up the positioning of East Palestine as a disaster in everyone's mind. That's why he did it. He wasn't talking about where all the contamination went here in Pennsylvania. That's a reality, everyone. That is the reality of this. That really happened. It really happened. Everything that I've said is true. The only thing we could have a discussion about maybe is the amount of it. Like, was there 30 or 34? How many containers? But when Norfolk Southern came out and told the Associated Press the day following the derailment on the 4th, they told the Associated Press there were 14 tankers of vinyl chloride, and that there were 20 containers that were labeled as carrying hazardous materials. You can see the drone footage fly over. We're not talking about 20 in whole. We're talking about what probably is over 30 containers of hazardous materials. That's a fact. That really happened. It was really done. And they're carrying in the court 5 containers. Sorry, man. I tell the truth about Senator Doug Mastriano. He carried, the lie. He carried it. He did it. He positioned it. You see the graphic there? You see graphic, you got 2 of them there. 2 radar, moments there. The one that you see that's closest is with the green is the night of the evening of the 6th of February. That's when they did what they called the controlled release, the massive dispersal disposal. You see where you see Palestine there, that's East Palestine, and you see where that plume is. The red line is Pennsylvania border. And I can tell you now that the reason why there's even the green is because when it went up, the heat took it up. We're talking about initially. So the winds were moving like 2 to 3 miles per hour. So the heat was enough that it took all of that shit up. Yes, around the area right there locally where it was. You see, that's not the town of East Palestine. It's on the outskirts. That and in this other one, so around that, yeah, man, it got it around there, but it really got it here in Pennsylvania. You look at that, and you know what? There's a history of everything from the time of the derailment fires all the way through them burning the shit off illegally, intentionally. Everything there on the site. Now the one that's underneath there, the one that's like a bluish, like a turquoise color, that radar, that was the night of the derailment fires. That trajectory of that shit went all the way down to really Aliquippa and maybe beyond. So how bad did they get it? I can tell you that even today, if you go along Route 51, if you go to certain areas where that was, even today, if you sit there long enough on the ground, you'll taste the chemical that you smell off of Taggart Road, right there at the derailment. You'll taste it because it's that bad. I experienced that, by the way, off of Route 51. I tried that. It's like I'm trying my best, man. I've been needing hip replacement surgery for over 6 years now. The VA has stalled it, I don't know what the hell, man. It's really fucked up, and it really is debilitating, when you need hip replacement surgery, and the other hip is bad too. Man, it's bad. It's pretty bad. Yeah, it's really bad. You know, it really is bad. Your health really cascades, man, when you can't fucking exercise. You know, when you're fucking this, when it's this bad, when you need fucking hip replacement surgery. I'm a disabled veteran, and I can't get that fucking done. You know, and then you know, I don't want to go off on a tangent. But you know, I even talked to a doctor that worked, you know, outside of the VA for like over 15 years, and he looked at my sugar and everything, and he said, I would have done this surgery for you. You know, I wouldn't have had you wait. You know, if I would have met you outside of the VA. That just shows you, man. I mean, I knew that. Anyway, I took a bike ride, and I was along Route 51 because I was exhausted, man. Just so hard, you know, to do anything. And I sat down along the guardrail there off of Route 51 in between here and East Palestine. And I could taste that fucking chemical, you know, that you could smell off of Taggart. I was sat down there on the ground for maybe 10 minutes, and then I was tasting that shit. It got into me. Nasty. Fucking nasty, man. So, yeah, that, you know, there's an aquifer there, you know, that got killed, a spring, the only spring. So much pride to people in this area for that natural spring, how much they loved that natural spring that everyone public here had access to. You know, I haven't had a garden in 2 years. I'm not going to use it. I don't want to, you know, ingest that shit any more than I have. And I've seen animals that, you know, were lethargic like I'd never seen before in my life. You know, and who knows, if there had been people out walking in the woods, they probably would have found a lot of dead animals. When I tell you that I didn't see a bird here in Darlington for over a month, I want to say more like 2 months. You wouldn't hear or see a bird here in town. I didn't, and I'm speaking the truth. I realized it one day. I'm like, man, I haven't seen a bird in over, like, it was like 2 months. So I'm not saying that it killed all the birds, but they weren't here, man. They freaking shuffled off. I don't know where, you know, they went away from this area. Now you could escape it. You know, you get up to Chippewa, a few miles from here. So that's probably what happened. There was a lot of wildlife that did. I found, you know, a dead goose over there close by where, you know, they're off of Taggart. And now I've heard that the ponds, of course those ponds are full of contamination, you know, off of Taggart Road. And there are anywhere where there was a runoff, you know, into a pond or what have you, there would have to be, you know, a lot of that shit's in that pond, a lot of it. And I've seen what that can do, you know, like with the Beaver River, you know, as a kid, you know, it was so contaminated, you know, from runoff of shit, you know, upriver, that you couldn't catch a bullhead catfish without a tumor on it. So who knows how this is going to manifest? I don't know. I don't know.